So my name is Tracy Hyman. I'm the National Director of the Commercials and Co-Ed Department. This is Claudette Singh. She is our Senior Director. She is based in Los Angeles. I'm normally based in New York, so I don't know what day or time it is because I think I flew in a few days ago, and I've lost all sense. What we're going to talk about is the audio commercials contract. Now, yesterday I did two presentations on the commercials contract. That is a completely separate agreement than the audio commercials contract, and they address two different types of commercials. What we're going to be talking today has no visual element. This is old school. You're sitting in the car and you're flipping through your radio, you have your boom box, you're listening, or you're on like Pandora. There's no visual element. It is oral only. So there's either singers or speakers or multiples of people, but there will be nothing on screen. And that's what an audio commercial covers, which is different than a voiceover on a TV commercial that's covered by the commercials contract. So we're going to hear some things that are similar to the commercials contract that we discussed yesterday or that you may already know, but the contracts are negotiated differently. There are several things that we try and keep in a line just to make them easier to administer and for everyone to remember all the provisions. But they do have very distinct features. So let's dive in. Whoops, I'll dive in and I'll get my thing working. There we go. So who we negotiate? We negotiate with the Joint Policy Committee, or the JPC. They represent advertisers and ad agencies. These are the same people we do negotiate with for the commercials contract. And in fact, we do negotiate them at the same time. So the contracts both expire March 31st, 2025. And when we meet for the 6 weeks to negotiate, there's always a couple of days in there where we address the audio commercials contract specifically. So it is the same group of people. But in addition to the JPC advertisers and ad agencies, we also have direct signatories. And these are ad agencies, advertisers, recording studios, and audio houses that specifically sign and adhere to the audio commercials contract. Both the authorizers and our direct signatories are treated exactly the same, meaning they have to abide by the same terms and conditions as each other that's laid out in the contract, and they've committed to only doing union audio commercials. March 31st, 2025 is when this contract expires. As we're getting ready to go into W&Ws, we thought this would be a great refresher on it. We will be spending time during W&Ws talking about the audio commercials contract and any concerns that you have so that we can develop proposals to bring across the table for it. The audio commercials contract does not have exclusivity, and this is one of the main differences between the commercials contract and the audio commercials contract. You are not held to exclusivity, and additionally, this contract covers all languages, not just English and Spanish. A breakdown for an audio commercial contract for an audition. The auditions are the first and second are 1 hour. If they go over the hour, you are eligible for overtime pay. And for the third and subsequent auditions, it is a 1 hour call that you are compensated for with overtime additionally paid over. There is something called a creative session call, and that is when you're brought in and you are not provided really any material to work with to create the commercial. You're told it's a spot for a leave and you have a headache, create. That's different than if you were brought in and said, okay, you are doing a commercial for a leave, you have a headache, you're at a baseball game, and your 3-year-old is sitting next to you crying. Create. So a creative session call isn't giving you really any substance or direction where, so you would get an additional payment if you are brought in for a creative session call. In the breakdown, it should indicate any waivers that are being utilized, such as the public service announcement, social media, dynamic audio, or AI dynamic audio. It also should indicate what the intended use is, meaning what their idea of how they're going to use the spot is. It's not a guarantee, but it is what they're aiming towards. Additionally, they have to specifically tell you if they're going to be using it as a dealer commercial or as a made for internet or made for new media. And we'll be talking about those in a little bit. There's also the Exhibit E, just like there is for the commercials contract. There should be one for you to sign in and out. Please always sign in and out and use your member number because you may be eligible for overtime if your audition goes over the designated length. The non-disclosure confidentiality agreement, which is on the back of your employment contract, now covers the audition itself. So if when you go into the audition, you learn something about the commercial that isn't in like the breakdown, let's say the breakdown had a confidential or a pseudonym for the name of the product, but while you're doing the audition, you find out what the product is, that you would need to keep confidential. You of course can talk to your agent or SAG-AFTRA, but don't go posting that you just did an audition for a job that hasn't been openly put out there. Finally, you cannot be required to possess any specific equipment to audition for an audio commercial. They can ask that you have access and that you use specific equipment if you get the job, but to actually do the audition, they cannot require you to use any specific equipment. So you get this job and you work. Your session is a 90-minute session paid at $347.60. And you're paid in 90-minute increments. It depends on the number of sessions worked or the number of commercials recorded. Whichever is greater is what you're compensated. So if during a 90-minute session you record 2 commercials, you would receive 2 session fees. And if for any reason it took you 2 90-minute sessions to record 1 commercial, you would get 2 session fees. So whichever is greater, the number of commercials recorded or the number of 90-minute blocks that you work. The session fee may be applied or credited to the use payment as long as the use starts within 13 weeks of when you work. And we'll go through some slides that have some diagrams on how that works. Additionally, if you work on a holiday, you are eligible for double time. So as your session payment is due within 15 business days of the date that you work, and any use payments are due within 15 business days of when it first starts being used in each medium. If they are not timely, late fees may be due. So the life of a commercial, what we call the maximum period of use, or the MPU, is 21 months. What this means is that the advertiser signatory can use the commercial for 21 months. At the end of the 21 months, if they want to continue to use it, they have to come back and negotiate with you for a new 21-month term. The way we determine what the MPU is based on either the first date of use or the end of the first 13 weeks from the date that you work. So we determine that by, here's an example, it's a close-up of a timeline. You'll see that the last production date or your production date is the purple triangle. The first use is that orange star, and so that will start the MPU. And if you see here, this is expanded out, you'll see that the MPU then goes for the full 21 months. So because the orange star is during the first 13 weeks, and we know that it's in the first 13 weeks because if you look, you'll see the clapboard is at your last workday. The little change icon is indicating the end of a 13-week or the start of the next 13-week. So another way to look at this is if the use actually starts after the 13 weeks. So here we have the last production day. We have the end of the 13 weeks. If you look at that gray sort of bracketing, it says 13. The maximum period of use is being indicated at the end of that. And then the first use is happening afterwards. Because the first use is after, the end of the 13 weeks is what's going to be triggering the start of the NPU for the full 21-month period. We can, so the difference again is if it is before that 13 weeks, then the MPU starts from the first use date. If it's after the MPU, after the 13 weeks, then the MPU starts at the end of the 13 weeks. Something else to note is that if the use starts within that first 13 weeks, they are allowed to apply the session fee, meaning that you would work in 15 business days, you would get your session payment. And then when they start using it, 15 business days later, you would get a check for the difference between the full payment for the type of use that they're running minus the session fee that you were already paid. If the use starts after that 13 weeks, the session fee cannot be applied. So it can only be applied if the use starts within that first 13 weeks. The MPU should be indicated on your first use check, so you have an idea of when that end of that 21-month period is. So the big thing to remember about audio commercials is that there is no exclusivity, which is very different from the commercials contract. So if you were to work on an audio commercial for Coke, you would be able to do a Pepsi spot, a Sprite spot, etc. If you worked under the commercials contract on an audio-visual commercial for Coke, you would have been held to other sodas, and you would not have been able to do a Pepsi commercial. But the thing to keep in mind is that the commercials contract exclusivity only applies to that commercials contract. It does not cross over to the audio commercials contract. So you could be in a Coke commercial for an audio-visual commercial and still do the VO on a Pepsi spot for an audio commercial. They do not interact regarding exclusivity. So there are 12 types of use under this contract. All are extremely specific to how it's being run and how what the intended purpose of the commercial is to some extent. So first we have the demo or copy test spot. This is where you would come in for a 1-hour session. Any overtime is paid in quarter-hour increments, and you would receive the demo session rate for each commercial that you record. That's if you're an announcer. If you were a singer, then for a solo duo singer, you would be paid for a 2-hour session. You would be allowed to record up to 4 commercials during that period for that 2-hour session. You could record unlimited multi-tracks, but each sweetening track would be its own spot. So if it's a group of singers, it's also a 2-hour session and they can record up to 4 spots, but there is unlimited multi-tracking and unlimited sweetening that can be recorded during that period also. So now let's move to terrestrial. I'm sorry, I have to take a drink. Terrestrial radio is what you think of when you're in the car and you're flipping through the channels, or when you have your boombox and you're hitting 98.7 FM. That's terrestrial. The other type of use that's out there is internet and new media. And that would be like Pandora or iHeartRadio that you're listening to through your computer or your phone. We'll start with terrestrial. So there are a number of different types of buys under terrestrial. We'll start with national program. A national program would be like a syndicated radio show like Delilah or Sean Hannity, and Sirius Radio is paid as national program. They can purchase time in a lot of different combinations. They can do 1 airing, they could do 1 week, 4 week, 8 week, 13 week, 13-week limited, and 13-week across the board. And you would be paid for each of those different types of buys that they're doing. The next type of terrestrial buy could be a regional network. And these are your sport network radio stations. And they are bought in 13-week cycles. Next is the local program use. This is when a spot is created specifically for use in that local area, and the brand sponsors the program that the commercial is running on. And that is purchased in 13 weeks. That's different than a wild spot buy, which is where the advertiser will pick and choose what cities or markets they want the commercial to air in. And that's paid based on whether one of the 3 major markets, New York, LA, or Chicago, is one of the locations where it's being aired. And each of the different markets or cities has a unit value based on the population. So what they would do is take the value of, let's say it was running in New York and LA, that's a specific value. They would add on top the unit values for wherever else it's running. So if it's in Boise and West Palm Beach and Boston, they would add up all those unit values. That would equal a set rate for the 8-week or 13-week buy that they're doing. So they do need to know each and every market that they plan on airing it in. The next type of use is also a single market commercial use. So that's if a local client creates a commercial for local use only, but there can be no weighted cities, meaning LA, New York, and Chicago cannot be one of the cities that, that this single market commercial airs in. Additionally, they can do a 1-year prepaid, but the year of prepayment cannot be less than the rate that is in the regional code for that area. So let's say that you're in Texas and the regional code there has an audio recording of it, and the percentage, I think it's like a 70% reduction if it's a made-in, played-in in that area. You would not be able to be paid less than what that regional rate is. If it came out, calculated out less, you would be at least paid the regional rate. Another type of terrestrial is, I'm going to skip local retail for a second. We're going to talk about dealer. A dealer is when the commercial is made by a designated advertiser, so like Toyota, and it's being provided to the various Toyota dealerships, and they're the ones who are placing the ad and running it. Another type of dealer is if Firestone Tires was to create a commercial and they provided it specifically to Firestone Tire stores, and they were placing it, that would be dealer. This is a type of buy that specifically has to be noted in the casting breakdown, and it can be paid in either 6-month or 8-week cycles. So local retail advertising, I'm going to talk about in 2 different places. We'll talk about it here, and then again when we talk about editing. So the particular language here is regarding singers who are on a local retail spot. A singer who is on that spot would be paid 3 times scale for the first cycle, and then 2 times scale for each additional cycle. And they can, so that's how the singers are compensated. They could do it in 8-week or 13-week uses. Now, what the other half of that is what happens with the announcer. So you have the song on the commercial, but there's the announcer, and the announcer is paid under the editing provisions to record each of the different offers that is laying on top of the song. So for example, if Macy's has a commercial, body of a commercial, there's singers in it, and the announcer changes from a Mother's Day sale to a pants sale to a shoe sale, the announcer would be paid for each one of those edits that they're recording, but the singers would still be paid what we stated about like 2 times scale for each cycle, because that remains constant. Next type of use is theatrical industrial. This is, they get 30 days for a session and then pay an additional 60% a session for a full 21 months of use. This would be if you're in a, let's say a baseball stadium and they're piping in the sports announcer, not from a radio station, but from within the stadium, and they play the spot, the audio commercial, during that in-stadium sound system. That would be a theatrical industrial. It could be at a point of purchase if the audio commercial is running where you're purchasing something, like on a, if you go to the gas station and there's an audio commercial playing when you get your gas, that would be theatrical industrial use. And then we have foreign use. This is bought in 18-month cycles, and it is there's a single rate that covers all foreign use. Next, we'll talk about internet and new media. Now, if you attended yesterday's commercials contract or you're familiar with that contract, you'll know that in 2022, we combined internet and new media into a bundle called traditional digital. Well, we haven't done that in the audio commercials contract. We still have an internet payment and a new media payment. An internet payment would cover Spotify, Pandora, iHeartRadio, things like that, where new media would cover the insertion of an audio commercial into a podcast or whatever new technology might come down the pike. Both internet and new media can either be purchased as made for or move over, which means that a commercial that was made for the internet is paid a specific rate for the 4-week, 8-week, or 1-year buy. Or it could be a move over spot, meaning the commercial was originally made for terrestrial, and then they moved it over to internet, and that has a different set of rates for the 4-week, 8-week, and 1 year. The new media mirrors that exactly. So if you have an audio commercial that's running both on Spotify and in podcasts, you would get 2 separate payments, one for the internet use and one for the new media use. The other thing about internet and new media is it still has the ability to have unlimited edits negotiated with you. So the editing provisions do not apply to the internet new media edits. Those are completely negotiable still. One of the types of waivers that we mentioned was the public service announcement. That is when a performer receives a session for recording the commercial, but the use is waived as long as it's running on donated media, meaning a lot of radio stations have specific time they set aside where they don't make a media buy, but they place the public service announcement. You would not receive any use payments for that. If they did place it on paid media, you would be paid residuals. They're allowed to use this for 1 year, and at the end of the 1 year, they have to get your permission to continue using it, as well as the union's permission to continue with it. And that, again, has to be identified in the breakdown. So we'll talk about editing and dubbing. There are very limited areas that they can edit of audio commercial. They cannot make shorter or longer versions. Each one of those would be considered its own commercial and paid separately. The edits that they are allowed to make include legal changes, which are changes due to broadcast continuity or certain legal requirements. The original spot must be removed and the updated spot put in its place. Another edit that's allowed to be made is they can re-record changes to the opening or closing of a commercial to update information on product availability. So if it's now available at CVS or it's now available at Walgreens, they can make that tag or that end change. And that would count as one for use purposes, and the performer who makes the change would be paid for the change. Additionally, for the factual changes could be that it's a dealer name with their contact information. So if they're changing out the phone number or the URL or the internet information, that would be considered a tag that would be allowed, and a performer would receive a tag rate, a reduced rate for recording it, and it would be one for use purposes. The next type of change that can be made is if it's a change in the phone number or contact changes. So for example, you may have seen commercials or heard commercials for, let's say, a class action lawsuit that a law firm is putting together. And there's a phone number that you're supposed to call if you want to be included in that class action. They might indicate different 1-800 numbers across a particular state because they want to know what area that call is coming in from. So the recording of all of those 1-800 numbers and placing them on the audio commercial, the performer would be paid tags in a sliding scale and then use as one for those commercials. Finally, there's special offers and promotions. And this is what we had talked about a little bit ago about the local retail advertiser. So when we spoke about that, we talked about how the singers would be paid. This is how the announcer is going to be compensated. So if a performer records, let's say, an ad for a shoe sale, and then a pants sale, and then a Valentine's Day sale, the advertiser is allowed to use each one of those for up to 6 weeks, then remove it and put up a new sale. So for example, let's say they buy a 13-week wild spot buy. They put the shoe sale, they air the shoe sale for 4 weeks. They then could remove that, put up the sale for Mother's Day, and continue to run out that 13 weeks that they paid for, as long as they switch out the commercials. And finally, they could, you would get a session fee if a performer were to do commercials where it's a different brand name. So that would be Carl's Jr. on the West Coast and Hardee's on the East Coast, or Hellman's versus Best Foods. They count as one for use purposes, but the performer would receive a full session fee for recording both versions. In 2019, we wanted to address the fact that there were so many different types of buys that you could make on audio. We wanted to try and simplify it. So we created something called the Audio Flex. The idea of this was to give advertisers an easier way to calculate what they will owe the performers and an easier way to determine how they're using it. So with the Audio Flex, there are 3 things an advertiser needs to know. They need to know their location, that they're going to be placing it. They need to know who's listening, and they need to know how long they're going to be running it for. So if you work on an Audio Flex, it should tell you that in the breakdown. The session fee is $350, and it can be applied. This is the only place where they can make a shorter edit, but they have to pay you $350 to make the edit, but for use, it would count as one. And then tags are priced at $110 per tag, but we also created bundles so that if you were to record, for example, a bundle of 10 tags, you would be compensated almost $880 for that bundle. Let's look a little bit deeper. So we'll start with location. The advertiser is going to not want to know if they're going to run the air the spot nationally or regionally or in specific cities. They also are going to need to know, where are people listening? Are they listening on terrestrial, or are they listening on digital, or are they listening on both? Where do I want my customer to hear the spot? And then how long do I want them to hear it for? 4 week, 8 week, 13 weeks, 6 month, or 1 year. So you break down the national or regional, if you want it terrestrial or digital or both, and then how long, and those translate to specific rates. As you can see, these are, for example, the audio regions. We've divided up the country into regions so that a company could just buy terrestrial use in the West. Obviously, internet and new media are going to be, or digital are going to be nationwide. The other thing is that under the Flex, it's the only place where we have combined internet and new media under the commercials contract. So under the traditional audio commercials, they're still separated, but under Audio Flex, they've been combined to be one rate. We have a couple of waivers we wanted to address. The first one we'll talk about is the dynamic audio waiver. Now, dynamic audio utilizes a specific digital technology to create customized audio-only ads with various elements or specifications that are changed based on who it's being delivered to. Could be the time of day, the location they're at, the weather. The way I think about it, the easiest maybe for me to understand is, remember the old Mad Libs, where there would be a story and there would be blanks throughout it where you have to put in like an adverb or an adjective or a noun. So you can think of it like a body of a script where they'll change out, one of the features might be the day of the week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. They might also change out morning, noon, or night. What happens is the performer records all of this, is put into using this technology, and an algorithm determines who is going to hear which version with which customizations of that commercial. So that's different than someone creating 3 spots and then choosing what markets or cities they're going to run it in. This is the technology determines which one is going to be served to the listener. So for this, you would be paid $550 per session for a 60-minute session. Overtime is paid in 30-minute increments. That session payment covers the recording of the body as well as the customization elements. You are paid per session or per commercial recorded, whichever is greater. And in this case, the session cannot be applied to use. They can purchase time in 1 week, 4 week, 8 week, 13 week, 6 month, or 1 year. And if a shorter version is created, then they would have to pay for the edited spot, but it would only be one for use purposes. Whoops, wrong direction. So artificial intelligence. This is something that in actually 2022, we put language into the audio commercials contract addressing if a signatory was planning on using a computer-generated voice of a performer created by any technology now known or hereafter developed, such as digital doubles, may not be used to evade the provisions of the audio commercials contract. So what that means is right now, if companies want to use artificial intelligence to create a digital voice replica, they must come to the union, discuss that with us, discuss what protections are going to be in place, how performers are going to be paid, and how it's going to be used. That information then goes to our commercials contract standing committee and eventually to the executive board. An example of this would be Narrative, which you may have heard about a couple of months ago. It's a platform for audio commercials where an individual performer can authorize their digital voice replica to be used for very specific commercials that they approve of. So that was one use of AI that we were able to work with the company to create the protections and the payment that are necessary. So we also took that dynamic audio waiver I spoke about a minute ago and applied AI to it. So if they're using digital technology to create custom audio only ads with the elements dynamically changed, but they're using a digital voice replica, this is how they're compensated. So performer goes in and records a commercial, 60 minutes. They receive $550 for the session. If they were to use that recording and create a digital voice replica of you and created a new commercial, you would not only have the opportunity to approve the use of your voice in that particular commercial, but you would be paid an additional $550 as though you had gone in and recorded it. Then, if they make these customization elements with your digital voice replica, you would receive an additional 50% of session for the creation of those elements. So again, as though you had actually recorded them, you would be getting compensated. And then use would be paid, just like under the dynamic audio waiver, for 1 week, 4 week, 8 week, 13 week, 6 month, or 1 year period of use. Additionally, anyone who's using this provision would need to, would be required to not use the voice or the materials created for the digital voice in any other manner without coming to the union and the performer. Additionally, they have to protect all of the materials and the digital voice replica from breach. And when the relationship between the performer and the signatory using this ends, all use and all copies of the voice and the materials must be deleted. Other helpful information is there is so much under the audio commercials contract. If there is a violation, please go to sagaftra.org/claims and file a claim. You'll receive in response a claim number as well as the name of your business rep. Please note that every claim is very different from any other one. They're very specific based on the facts. So there may be research that the business rep has to do, as well as once the letter is crafted and sent to the signatory, there probably will be research on the side of the signatory to determine if the violation occurred or not. You do have statute of limitations. If the claim is regarding your session, the claim must be within 6 months of the session date, or if it's related to the check for your session, 6 months from the receipt of the check-in. If it's for unpaid use, the claim must be filed 6 months from either the end of the MPU or from when you are released, whichever is earlier. Another thing to note is it is much harder under the audio commercials contract to protect anonymity when filing a claim, because more often than not, it's only 1 or 2 people who are on the audio commercial. Unlike the commercials contract where we can file on behalf of all performers in like circumstances, it is definitely harder. But we need to be filing these claims if something is not being followed in the contract. The only way to ensure that you are protected and that the contract is enforced is by us filing a claim against the signatory and requiring them to abide by the terms they have committed to abiding by. But we will always make sure that we have your permission to release your name or to file a claim when we would not do so without your permission. Another piece of this, of course, is the health and retirement benefits. There is a $1 million cap per year per contract. So if you were to have an audio commercials deal that was for $2 million in a year, the pension and health would only apply to that first million. The rates are 19.25% for JPC and 20.5% for direct signatories. And this is the only area where the treatment for direct signatories versus JPC is different, is that they do have 2 different contribution rates. Now, if you'll note, the audio commercials contract payments go to the SAG-AFTRA retirement plan. So the audio commercials contract was originally part of AFTRA. When SAG and AFTRA merged, the audio commercials contract came with it, and but nothing was changed regarding how the contributions were distributed. So the part that goes to health still goes to the SAG-AFTRA health plan, but the pension portion actually goes to AFTRA retirement, which is different than the commercials contract, where the pension goes to the SAG pension plan. So the monies are going to 2 different plans. The audio always goes to the AFTRA retirement. If you have any questions, you can always reach out to SAGAFTRaplans.org for help. And if you have questions regarding AFTRA retirement, please reach out to AFTRaretirement.org. And also, please note, we're 2 separate entities. SAG-AFTRA as the union is a completely separate entity from SAG-AFTRA health plans or the pension plan. So if you have any questions regarding your health benefits or pension credits, you need to contact them directly. Unfortunately, we're not able to help you on that. That's not our area of expertise. There is a lot more information on our website at sagaftra.org/commercials. You'll find our rate sheets there, as well as the memorandum of agreement and the contract itself. If you have any questions, you can always email com.coedinfo@sagaftra.org. That's checked throughout the day by our business reps. You can also call LA or New York, or if you're in one of the locals, please call your local office, and they'll be happy to answer any questions you have about the audio commercials contract.